Insights show with Jenn Vogel. Join Jenn and her guests for this live discussion around topics that will help you understand your customers better. Also available on podcast channels. This live stream is presented to you by Vox Pop Me, the leader in video research. Here's today's live conversation.
Hello, Insights professionals, marketers, and everyone who wants to understand their customers better. I'm Jenn Vogel, and today I am joined by Kalil Vicioso from Tiny Hat Consulting and board member of Insights in Color. Really excited about this conversation today, and welcome to the show, Kalil.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Really looking forward to jumping in on this topic of conducting multicultural research. And before we kind of get into that, I'd love to hear a little bit about Insights in Color. If you can tell us a little bit about the organization for anyone listening who maybe isn't familiar, and what prompted you to get involved with them.
Sure. So Insights in Color is an initiative that's rooted in disruption. So the goal is changing the industry from the inside out. Because fundamentally, the way we're conducting research is inherently out of step with multicultural America. So the goal of the initiative is to create solutions, tools, ideas that are going to help to drive change. And that's how we partner with brands and with agencies to help through these tools, resources, et cetera, to really help them drive change and start really shifting our industry so that it better reflects multicultural America. What got me interested in it, well, it was sort of the 2020 being the year that it was, all disruption all the time. But in some ways it was some welcome disruptions in some ways. So lucky to be on that side of it. Started Tiny Hat, launched a product called Culture Flows to track trends, cultural trends, using a combination of search and social. And sort of about halfway through the year, I saw a post that Whitney, who's the founder of Insights in Color, had put on, talking about the goal of disrupting the industry and why it was needed. That was just exciting. It felt like a call to arms, really timely. It's almost like it was the right moment for it. It's something that she had worked on previously in a different life when she was working at a consultancy where both of us worked at one point, trying to recruit more and more multicultural researchers, people and the insight side of it. But picked it up again because it just felt right. Like this was the time to pick this up again. There was energy, there was real awareness in a way that hadn't been for a while. At least, and by that I mean broader awareness. Those of us in industry, we are aware, but there needed to be broader awareness. One of the things that was really exciting about it is that when we worked together, this was at Kantar, I was just sort of more like mid-senior. Whitney at that point was getting going in her career in research. So it was really exciting that this next generation of people in insights was pushing the envelope even further, pushing it beyond where we had when I was starting out, when I was in the early days of my career in research. And that was exciting to just see that continual challenge going on. And some of that is, when I initially started doing research and was in multicultural, it was often seen as like a CSR, like it's for, corporate social responsibility. So we do some initiatives here and there. It was very language-based. If you have a different language group, well, then we need to do multicultural research. And for Hispanic Latinx, it was very about assimilation. So we were pushing the envelope then about actually, a lot of people are going to be bicultural. That's how they feel. They're mixing different cultures together. It's not just language. The culture is so much bigger than all of that. It's not an add-on because these are really influential segments that are driving change and have always been driving change. I mean, the influence of African American culture, as an example, in the U.S. it's almost impossible to calculate what the cultural impact has been. But the dollars weren't there, the investment wasn't there in research. Eventually, multicultural became sort of a typical part of, and we need to do multicultural. So we sort of pushed that far. And I think that the welcome change and the way that Insights in Color is positioned is really exactly where we need to go, which is it's time to disrupt all of that, because we live in a multicultural America, and our industry should reflect that.
Yeah. Okay. This is a strong start. All right. I'd love to maybe dig a little bit deeper into, I mean, you said very early on in when you started talking about the work that Insights in Color is doing, that the way we conduct research is out of step with multicultural America. And you mentioned a couple examples of that. Could you go into that a little bit in a little more detail? Like, what do we mean when we say that we're out of step with multicultural America?
I mean, I still think a lot of times the initiatives are still, well, have we done our multicultural work? Have we done anything with that segment? Are we targeting multicultural audiences? But it's still an add-on. It's a component of a larger initiative. And what ends up happening is you get a lot of energy when you have something like what happened last year with George Floyd and all of the attention that was focusing. And suddenly we're all very aware of it. But what happens is that, once it's not as hot, then attention moves back and we default back to this is an add-on. It's not central. It's not core. That's the shift, is that it can't be an add-on. It's not a component, because multicultural, diverse audiences are not a component of America. It is integral to the way that this country, the population of this country today.
Yeah, I'm drawing a sort of technology comparison, and I feel like I've probably used this example a lot in different conversations, but it's kind of like the mobile conversation. Like, are we doing mobile research, right? And eventually it's like, well, everybody's taking these surveys on their mobile devices, so it just should all be mobile, right? And then this idea of being mobile first, right? Okay, well, it's mobile first, but people can also take it on their desk. Like, this feels like a similar shift of, like, the industry was saying, have you done your multicultural research, as if it were a separate thing. Yes. But really that we as a society are multicultural, and that all of our research needs to have that embedded.
Absolutely. And I think it's a really good analogy. I've had that same conversation. It's like, well, people are doing it on their phone anyway, so it's all sort of mobile research, or creating a website. Like, oh, but have we done our mobile platform? Well, they're already going to your website on mobile. You're a step behind if you're thinking of it as an add-on.
Right. Exactly. That makes a lot of sense. And so, I guess, this seems like a silly question, but here we go. We're on a podcast and we're interviewing. Why is this important? Why is this important to our industry and to the businesses that we support?
One, I think most fundamentally, it's so that the brands, the clients, the agencies that we're supporting are actually reflecting the world today, and actually able to go out there with communications, with offer, with innovation that will be more relevant, that will be more resonant, and that can actually have a positive impact. And that's part of that shift as well, is I think they're threaded together, right? These conversations about having better, a more positive impact, as well as being more reflective of the world that we live in. So I think that those are the key reasons for me why it's so important, is you just really want to reflect the world that you operate in. You're part of this society, right? Brands are cultural actors. And if you want to be a responsible cultural actor, and if you want to reflect the world you live in and actually get the most from it, then it's really important to shift the way that you're organized around getting insight, around drawing inspiration, because that's what the research industry should be about, right? Is inspiring and guiding, and you get inspiration when you're really in the world that you live in, and the fact that it's inherently a multicultural world, that's just part of the reality we live in.
Yeah, and so this is, really more of it's like a pretty major mindset shift, as opposed to like, here's 3 steps you can take to, conduct your multicultural research. It's really like thinking about all the research that we're doing very differently.
Yeah, it's thinking about the research that we do, the way we set it up, the way that we create our research instruments, the language that we use, the sample, how we go about getting sample, who we talk to, and it's on the other end of it. It's about how we interpret it and how we analyze it and how we give it meaning. So then it's calling both for external changes in practices, and then fundamentally changes in the makeup of the industry, of who's involved, who's in your organization, how reflective is your organization, because you need somebody who can interpret the signals. So you have to both pick up on the signals and then be able to start interpreting those signals.
Yeah, I mean, this is a conversation that came up on a previous episode with Gilad Barash about brand activism, and like really for brands to be, take a stand on any issues, like having a diverse or a representative group of people working in that company to, be part of whatever initiatives they're putting out into the world is really important, to make sure that, you're capturing all the right perspectives and, thinking about the work that's being done from a diverse set of perspectives. And it seems like for research, this is just as crucial, like how we're wording things, how we're setting things up, the people that we're asking questions of, the people designing that research needs to be representative as well.
Absolutely. Designing it and then ultimately interpreting it and figuring out what it means strategically. How do we think about it and how to draw inspiration from it? That's fundamental to it. And there's kind of there's an additional value to it in that there's a real opportunity that gets missed when the research team, the strategists, among the creatives, et cetera, you don't have that representation because you're missing a different perspective on the world, right? You're missing that conversation that happens with people who have different life experiences. That conversation alone is inherently creative. The fact that with diverse audiences, you often almost by second nature grow up with the idea that there's no one way to do anything, because when I'm in this context, this is the way it happens. When I'm in school, this is the way we operate. When I go home, we operate in a slightly different way. When I'm among my friends, it might be different. And that's true for all of us to a degree. But I think when you come from a multicultural background, it gets dialed up. Just the degree to which those things are different, so you're operating in different sort of realities, that gets dialed up much higher.
That's really interesting. So I'm wondering how, companies that, are still, I'll say, a work in progress in terms of getting to a place where they have the representation that they want, because, it's no secret, this is a challenge in the insights industry where we are not as diverse as an insights industry as a lot of us would like to be. And I think that there are, certainly Insights in Color and CORE and some other organizations have been really working towards that, as well as companies in the industry themselves. But in that transitional phase, or companies who feel like they maybe aren't where they'd like to be, how do they address, that mindset shift of multicultural research not being a side add-on and being core to their function without maybe having the representation they would like?
That's a really good question. From an Insights in Color perspective, a lot of initiatives, and I'll have some links to share that can be shared later. Right. But one is there's sort of 3 tools that immediately we've been focused on. So one is a diversity sense check tool. And what that does, it allows researchers from brands or agencies to self-assess what their practices are, to really get a sense for like bias in research, design, and instruments. But it's a tool that allows them to like kind of go through it and see where can I be shoring things up? Where are we falling short? What is it that I'm not thinking of? Because sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what you're missing. So it's just a tool that helps to do that. We're also just recently launched inclusive research standards. And that was in partnership with Lucid and Think Now. And the goal of that is to provide some guidance for how to think about identity variables. So that's everything from the language to use and how to ask questions and how to do that in a thoughtful way. So guidance provided that way. And then finally, there's an industry call to action, which is really about highlighting how important it is to start shoring that diversity, whether that's through internal teams, external consultants, some combination of that, but throughout the whole process. So everything from the inspiration phases through the creative development, but among the creatives themselves, among the product developers themselves as well. How to make sure that those voices are coming through there, whether that's internally because you're recruiting, you're actively working on it, and we know it's time to start filling the pipeline. It's not going to happen overnight. So in those cases, it's really working with outside consultants that can help to bring that voice in. From a tiny hat perspective, for me, that just means working very consultatively. So sometimes it's about working on an ongoing basis to interrogate existing research and where are the knowledge gaps and what do we need to know and how are the teams structured and how can I help you, empower you to keep going down this path, to keep improving and keep reflecting and being smarter about the analysis. And working closely with consultants who can help run research or be involved consulting on different research projects. So I think those are some of the things they can do in the meantime. Is Insights in Color is an initiative that's really kind of focused on helping bridge that transition and ongoing basis. We also help with recruiting. So the talent pipeline. So that's a really crucial and important piece of this as well. Is being able to identify talent and also find a place where people who are interested in research, who are experienced researchers, are looking. And so now it's a platform that's going to help us to do that. So those are some ways to do that.
That's incredible. I didn't know about the talent pipeline. So that's awesome. That's really cool. There's so many great resources available. Through your organization. I love the diversity sense check tool. That is a great way to kind of, plug stuff in and make sure that there's no unconscious bias in the language and the things that are being put out there into the world. And that's fantastic. I will plug, I just saw on LinkedIn that the Insights Association has a committee called IDEA, which is on these same topics, and they have an event happening on July 14th and 15th. So I'll plug that. Maybe I'll throw a link in the comments here after the show is over, but I just saw that right before we jumped on. So I'll plug that. All that to say, there's like so many resources in the industry now that are being built and are available to all of us to do better in this area, which is amazing.
Absolutely, because it is definitely not a short-term fix. There are things you can do in the short term, initiatives like the one you mentioned, some of the tools and resources that Insight in Color is making available. Those are great short term, medium term, and some even long term. Part of the long term solution has to be about talent because you need to have that you need to make it intuitive. And the only way that some of this becomes intuitive in the way that you design research and the way you analyze it, the way you implement the findings, how it comes through in your creative. And to make that intuitive, you have to have people who that's their life experience, right? And that's a medium to long-term proposition. So that's going to be, I think, where a lot of the harder work is currently, but heartened because there are definitely plenty of clients and agencies that we've spoken to who are really committed to getting this right and investing the time in the short to long term to make sure that happens. So that's really, that's sort of, I think one of the better ways to think about it is just think about your from a brand perspective or a client perspective, I just say, think about what are your short-term things you can do, medium-term things you can do, and long-term things you can do, and then partner with the right people to help you figure out how to achieve those. And whether that's, all right, so I'm going to recommend you work with IIC on this and this, we'll work together on these other things, and then, I'll help where I can in terms of the recruiting talent piece, but IIC can do that too. So I think it's that kind of holistic approach.
Yeah. That's really easy to understand also. Easy to wrap your head around when you kind of break it down into those segments. So if recruiting talent is one of the more long-term initiatives, what would you say is a really short-term, how could a company get started to make this shift?
I think one of the quickest things to do is the diversity sense check. I think that one is one where you can start to immediately get a sense for wow, I didn't realize that, we didn't think about that way. Cool. That kind of insight's really important to start to open up eyes. So those are some of the immediate ones. The other piece of it is bringing in the right consultants, working with people who have experience and expertise, working with diverse audiences, who've been thinking about these topics for some time, both through lived experience and professional experience. So those are some of the things that can happen now, and that's already starting to happen. I've developed some relationship with some clients where it is more consultative. It is interrogating existing research, thinking about questions that have been unasked, and how to start thinking about what the solution is to getting insights around them. So I think that's part of the short and medium term things that brands can start to do, that agencies can start to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think honestly, it's nice that these conversations are happening, right? I know for me, even just having these conversations is really helpful. And, we recently were kind of looking at, well, how do we, how are we wording our demographic questions for our community, right? And so just having a conversation with you about that, I was like, oh yeah, I never thought of that. I mean, you mentioned earlier, there's a difference between language and culture, and just saying that, it's so eye-opening. So, even just none of this stuff is going to be improved or changed if we're not having these conversations. And seeing so many of these conversations happen in the industry is exciting. That is the first step to actually making some change here.
I think so. And I think that the approach that you bring to it is sort of right on, because there's openness to I don't know. I don't know what I don't know. And so I'm just really curious, wanting to learn. And for all of us, it's always important to be comfortable with being a little uncomfortable. It's sort of how everybody grows. And as an industry, it's time for us to be comfortable with being a little uncomfortable so that we can actually grow as an industry.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it is organizations like Insights in Color that are making it comfortable. Here's the tools you have. Here's the information that you need to educate yourself, or the resources of people that can help to educate you, which is fantastic. Now, in terms of the kind of language piece, obviously, in Insights, we're all interested in talking to our consumers and, through surveys, and, at Box Pop Me, we're doing video surveys. I guess, how do I want to word this question? What should we be aware of when we're thinking about the language that we're using in our surveys, in our questions that we're asking, and, when we are talking to consumers, which is really the core of what we're all trying to do?
Sure. I tend to think about research design in a way from the idea of, for me, it's an obsession with lived experience. But I break that down as all right, so lived experience is at the core, it's culturally embedded. So, and culture is dynamic and it's shifting. So important to stay on top of how language is changing. What used to be the way that we refer to something starts to shift, and how is it shifting and why is it shifting? More recently, the emergence of the term Latinx, right? So, but that kind of should inspire some questions. Who self-identifies as Latinx? Is it broad? Is it narrow? How do we start to integrate that into our tools? Does it mean we change everything out to be Latinx, or how do we make that more inclusive? Right? So those are kind of questions that I think are important to ask, because culture is dynamic and we're culturally embedded. So we're all being kind of shaped and influenced by the culture that we're in. The other part of it is that we kind of live through our senses, right? So it's always important to ask about how people are experiencing things, how culture comes to life through what we see and hear and taste and smell and feel, etc. Because that's kind of what human experience is ultimately about. And those are all really important cultural touch points. So if you want to deconstruct culture, you're going to end up talking about the senses and music and flavors and texture, etc. So important to keep a focus on that. And then the third piece for me is to focus on what are the goals people have, what are the jobs to be done, what are the jobs they're trying to accomplish, and what are the tools that they use to help them achieve that, what are the symbols that they use to give things meaning. So those are, for me, those are the kind of the way that I think about structuring research, because that will always keep you with a cultural lens through all aspects of it, from how people are, the most sensorial, physical aspects of it to the most symbolic aspects of it. When you think about it that way, that filter will always be there. From a multicultural perspective, it will put culture front and center. So it'll make it harder for you to miss where you actually have nuances and differences that are important to take into account.
Yeah. I mean, you said jobs to be done, and speak my language there. I love that. But I want to talk a little more about this idea of experiencing culture through the senses, because this is really interesting to me, and I don't think I've described this way. And I guess what I'm thinking about, a lot of the researchers that I've spoken to on the show and, our customers, they're talking about, researchers have a sort of innate curiosity, right, to just understand people. And oftentimes it's in the context of a product or a brand or an advertisement. But this feels like, we need to be just going a level deeper into that empathy of understanding people's cultures, what's important to them, what their experiences are, their life experiences are, before we're asking them about, do they prefer regular or diet or whatever, which feels like, kind of right up our alley as an industry, right? Mm-hmm. That feeding that curiosity to just understand people better, and not so much, understanding people as consumers, but having that empathy for understanding people as people, and really having a better, more clear understanding of our differences and our similarities.
Absolutely, and I think that sort of sensorial experience is so key to getting there. I'm reading a book I'll recommend called Extended Mind. I think Annie Murphy Hall, if I'm remembering correctly. But this idea of the extended mind is I geek out on it. It was something I was into a lot when I was back in graduate school. But it's that idea that we tend to have a brain bias. So as researchers, our default is to ask about what are your thoughts and what are your feelings, and it's the most abstract level, and we quickly jump to that before we've gotten to the what was it like moving through this space, and what were you touching and hearing and smelling and tasting, and the textures and all of the things that, when you think about it, that's what makes up culture. Those are they both express culture, but also shape culture. And we often skip them because we're racing to the abstract thoughts and feelings before we've gotten to the actual physical experience, the sensorial experience of it.
Okay. This is so interesting to me. I guess, how do you get to that sensorial experience? What kind of questions do you ask to really understand that?
I've often incorporated a lot of kind of exercise that involve people closing your eyes, because I want to shut off a sense, and kind of put people into a different space. It's often the pre-work, what I have people focus on, what I want them to take pictures of, what I want them to shoot video of, enacting things. So really take me through this, but act it out. What does it actually feel like? What is it? Because I want to get to that level of things. Even some like sort of play acting of like, if it's for, I did this years ago, but it was for a food brand and want to know how they could use our product. So for me, it was like, well, this is about cooking shows, right? I want to put people in a cooking show and I want to get them to act this out, because there's so many physical cues that we'll miss if I just sit there and ask somebody how they go about doing this. Even if I'm in their kitchen and I'm just asking them, how do you do it? That's different than my saying, okay, so like prepare a dish and have somebody video it and narrate what you're doing. That gives me a lot more depth into that sensorial experience of it, what that's like. So it's coming up with solutions like that, I think, that are going to help us get there, and always putting that sensorial experience front and center. Just so that we're always thinking about, well, how can I better tap into that, as opposed to jumping to what do you think and what do you feel, which ultimately is just so focused on our brain versus the holistic person.
Yeah. And that's so powerful, because it is not only focused on the brain, it's focused on the conscious part of the brain, which is, very a small percentage of what we actually use. So, what you're describing of, act this out, or like really show me what you're doing. Like, I probably couldn't describe to you like how I cook a meal, right? Because some of it just happens subconsciously. It's just routine or whatever. So actually, like, being able to experience that with consumers or with people is, you learn so much more.
Yeah, there's like wisdom in your hands when you're cooking. And it's not accessible to your brain, but your hands know what they're doing. And I think we miss that when we jump to like thoughts and feelings and skip over that kind of physical, acted out, being in the world piece of it.
That's fantastic. And that applies to so many different things that we do in our lives, driving,
Absolutely.
Walking the dog or whatever. It's like everything just happens.
Yeah. And that's where I think, our clients will get the most inspiration, because that's the material stuff of the world that's going to be inspiring. And again, if you're looking at a multicultural America and you want to get some inspiration, that's where you want to get it from, is that lived experience. Because that's where you'll come up with different ways of thinking about texture and color and flavor and sounds and rhythms, et cetera, all of that, right? All of those components of culture are not in our heads. They're in the world around us. They're part of our sensory experience.
Amazing. That seems like a good place to leave it. This has been a really fun conversation. A lot of good insights that you shared. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. I love this conversation.
Yeah, me too. If anybody listening is needing some guidance in this area, please reach out to Kalil, get in touch with Insights in Color, and really leverage the support and the collaboration with others in the industry who are making the change. So thanks everybody for listening. Don't forget to rate and review our show wherever you listen to podcasts. And on the next episode, I'm going to be joined by Ashley Shelley of Dish. I will see you then.